And we are waiting to see Air Force One take off in just a few moments as the president heads to Detroit while the White House punches back on a report about Mr. Trump's taxes. Good morning to you. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers in for Jenna Lee. Nice to be here again.
It's good to have you here.
Yeah, another very busy day.
We got all kinds of things going on.
To say the least, President Trump is off to Motor City to meet with auto executives and union workers. That is where he's expected to announce a rollback of rules on car and truck pollution. Now, while lawmakers in the president's very own party, like Senator Lindsey Graham, demand answers on his allegations of wiretapping by President Obama and his campaign ties to Russia. All of this after a night of high drama revolving around MSNBC's report on Mr. Trump's taxes, which he has refused to make public. Rachel Maddow revealing 2 pages from his 2005 return that show Mr. Trump paying $38 million in taxes. So let's get more on all of that's going on with our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. I hope everyone was taking notes.
Hey, good morning to you, Heather. Yeah, you've got to take copious notes here at the White House to keep up. The president left aboard Marine One, headed to Joint Base Andrews just a short time ago, professing outrage over the fact that a couple of pages of his 2005 tax returns were released. The president tweeting this morning, quote, "Does anybody really believe that a reporter who nobody ever heard of, quote, went to his mailbox and found my tax returns? Fake news." No question, though, that this plays pretty well for the president, who has been questioned about how much money he made and how much taxes did he pay, because this 2-page of returns shows that he paid about $38 million in income taxes and other taxes on an income of just over $153 million. Here's the way the taxes broke down. He paid about $5 million in regular income tax, about $31 million in the alternative minimum tax, which a lot of people, including the president, want to get rid of, and $2 million in self-employment taxes. That makes an effective tax rate for the president of about 25.3%. That compares to 22.48% among people who are relatively in his income bracket, 18.7% for President Barack Obama back in 2015, and Bernie Sanders' effective tax rate of 13.5% back in 2014. All of this bringing a sharp response from the White House. A senior administration official telling Fox News, quote, "You know you're desperate for ratings when you're willing to violate the law to push a story about 2 pages of tax returns from over a decade ago. Before being elected president, Mr. Trump was one of the most successful businessmen in the world, with his responsibility to his company, his family, and his employees to pay no more tax than legally required." He did take some fairly substantial write-offs, though, on those 2 pages of tax returns. He indicates a write-off of $105 million. That could be left over from the $918 million that we learned about from that partial tax return from 1995. He was also, according to the Wall Street Journal, eligible for a $39.1 million charitable contribution. That was in the form of what's called a conservation easement that the president took on his golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey. He promised that he would never develop that into anything other than green space, golf course, and therefore he gets that charitable deduction for that. That's quite common practice. Some people bundle those things together and they actually sell them as tax breaks. The returns were published on dcreports.org. The writer who put them out there says that he found them in his mailbox on Monday. David K. Johnston, who is the writer, suggesting that the president himself may have forwarded the documents to him to prove that he actually does pay taxes, which is in contradiction to what a lot of Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, said during the campaign. The White House, though, dismissing that idea, taking a whack at the media by saying, quote, "It is totally illegal to steal and publish tax returns. The dishonest media can continue to make this part of their agenda, while the president will focus on his, which is tax reform, that will benefit all Americans." The White House position on this, Heather, basically the president made a lot of money. He was a successful businessman, but he also paid a lot of taxes. Now, what else is on his agenda today? He's headed to Ypsilanti, Michigan, where he's going to talk about fuel efficiency standards and auto emissions with automakers there. Likely that they'll just stop the Obama-era EPA rule on fuel efficiency from going into effect. That called for cars to have an average of 50 miles per gallon by the year 2025. The White House position on that is that That's burdensome regulation. It needs to be somewhere between 27.5, which it currently is, and 50, but probably not 50. And then tonight, he's got that big campaign-style rally in Nashville, Tennessee, where he'll talk about health care. So another full day here at the White House, as it always is. Heather?
Absolutely. And all this talk about taxes, I still need to do mine. But I have numbers nowhere like that.
Me too.
Way different. Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Well, the battle over health care is also heating up, with Republican leaders trying to get different factions of their party on board. Moderate Republicans are defecting after learning millions could lose or forego insurance under the GOP plan. Conservatives hate it because it doesn't repeal the Affordable Care Act entirely. Well, on America's Newsroom today, Senator Rand Paul offered his solution.
This bill isn't going to fix the health insurance problem. Obamacare really created the problem. This bill doesn't fix it, and it acknowledges it doesn't fix it because they keep all of these subsidies for insurance companies. Now, I have an idea that would fix the insurance market. What I would do is I would let every individual buy a group plan, and all of a sudden, the individual would become king. The patient would be king again, and instead of us bowing down to the insurance companies, they would have to come and negotiate for our business.
Also, House Speaker Paul Ryan under the hot glare of conservative outlet Breitbart News for an audio tape of the speaker trash-talking then-candidate Donald Trump last year. Let's bring in Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and co-author of Politico's Playbook. This Ryan tape was apparently made of a recording just after the Donald Trump Access Hollywood tape was released, correct?
That's right. It was actually the day after the debate in St. Louis, Missouri, the presidential debate in St. Louis, Missouri. I remember driving to the airport, having to pull over while people on the call were text messaging me and telling me what was going on. Now, the tape in and of itself is new because we haven't actually heard the audio before Breitbart released it. But the contents are not new. There's no big secret that Donald Trump and Paul Ryan did not get along during the campaign. Paul Ryan frequently criticized him. His explanation is there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since then, like Donald Trump won the election, and the speaker is now working very closely with the president, but it was definitely a shock to some on Capitol Hill, a few people, really not many. It hasn't had much buzz on Capitol Hill, but it was a shock to kind of hear it for yourself and not just read it in words.
Well, I'm curious that Breitbart is the organization that released this tape.
Breitbart published it. I'm not sure how they obtained it. That's a question for Breitbart. Obviously, someone on the call. This is a members-only conference call, only for members of Congress. Very few aides are let on this call. So you'd have to imagine that a member of Congress taped the call and gave it over, although I have no inside knowledge, no idea, and I wouldn't venture to guess any further how Breitbart got a copy of the tape.
So it's curious that those two who were at odds, as you point out during the campaign, Speaker Ryan and now President Trump, are working together to get this American Health Care Act passed. Your Political Playbook says it's in real trouble.
It is, and listen, I think winning cures a lot of things. Paul Ryan and Donald Trump are now presumably on the same team and they're each other's victories, you know. If Paul Ryan wins, Donald Trump wins, and vice versa, in theory. Now, this bill that Paul Ryan and Donald Trump both support, this health care replacement bill, is running into some, very tricky waters in the House of Representatives. I think moderates are kind of walking away from it because they don't think it's going to pass the Senate, and conservatives don't like it because it doesn't go far enough for them. So Paul Ryan is caught between these two poles. Now, the Senate does not have the votes to pass this. So what behind the scenes members of Congress are saying to us and to their own colleagues is vote for this, get it to the Senate, they're going to fix it over there, and then we're going to pass this and give this to the president. This is our only opportunity. We don't have much time. Now, a lot of the problems they're encountering are self-inflicted wounds because Donald Trump has promised to do a lot in a short amount of time, which is not, we've all been watching Washington for a long time. Things don't happen quickly here. This is a very slow-moving town. So I think it would have been, from what members are telling us, it would have been smarter for Donald Trump to say, we're going to get tax reform and health care repeal done by the midterm election, by the end of 2018. That would have been a more attainable goal. He
may be finding that politics is a much tougher place to get things accomplished than the construction industry where he comes from. So the interesting thing to me, House members have to run, obviously, every 2 years.
Right.
Memories are very vivid every time they come up for re-election. And so there are a lot of people who are balking at voting on this bill just because they don't want that vote recorded, knowing that it may not pass in its current form in the U.S. Senate?
I mean, I think what they think is if I'm not going to get any political upside or substantive upside for taking a vote on this, why would I do it if it's going to die in the Senate? We saw that back in the early days of the Obama administration with the cap-and-trade vote, which was a system by which basically the government taxed carbon emissions. And that bill never got anywhere in the Senate, didn't even get a vote in the Senate. And you see a lot of people in the Midwest, a lot of Democrats in the Midwest and places like Ohio and West Virginia had Republicans ran campaigns against that vote when they cast a vote for that in the House and it didn't go anywhere. So I think, listen, every member of Congress, is, whether they want to admit it to us or not, is looking at the next election and
Jake Sherman, Political Playbook. Jake, thank you very much. Taking a look at President Trump, who is leaving the White House, boarding Marine One. And, well, you want to know about the difference between one administration to the next. He is jetting off to Detroit aboard Air Force One to announce relaxation of fuel standards that were instituted by President Obama as part of his effort to try to fight global warming. Mr. Trump is headed to Ypsilanti, Michigan. He's going to be saying that the fuel standards that have been imposed by the White House are too stringent. He's going to relax them and, tell Detroit that they don't have to come up with 50-mile-per-gallon cars, apparently.
Arguing they impact jobs.
Yeah, well, that is true. We will continue to cover the president's travels as he heads to Michigan today.
All right, we'll be on it. Well, as tempers flare over President Trump's revised travel plan, we've been following that for you, the courts are hearing arguments on blocking the order just hours before it takes effect. Dan Springer is covering this for us, and he is live from Seattle. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Heather. There will be a lot of court watching today. This is a big day, no doubt, for the Trump administration, people interested in, worried about terrorism, and certainly those who are lined up against the Trump revised travel ban. There are federal court hearings in 3 states. The one in Maryland is going on now. That's a case filed by the ACLU on behalf of local Muslims. A similar case in which the Islamic plaintiffs were granted class action status will happen this afternoon here in Washington State. And in Hawaii, the state is suing to get a nationwide restraining order. The executive order, which now affects 6 states, is scheduled to take effect at midnight tonight. Unlike the first order, people with valid visas and green cards will not be impacted. All of the lawsuits allege that this is still an effort to ban Muslims, and they point to statements made by Donald Trump when he was running for president. But the Supreme Court has ruled that judges should not look at campaign statements to decide the intent of legislation being challenged. Legal experts say Trump's revised order has a much better shot at being upheld than the first.
The second executive order is more carefully drafted, it's narrower, and it creates an exemption program or a waiver program. So even people who are clearly covered by the executive order can apply to be exempted from it and still get in.
But opponents say the second order still makes Muslims feel like second-class citizens and therefore violates the Establishment Clause. But the administration argues this is about countries that export terrorism. In a brief filed yesterday, government lawyers wrote, the second executive order does not convey any religious message. It does not reference religion at all. Those countries represent only a small fraction of the world's 50 Muslim-majority nations and are home to less than 9% of the global Muslim population. Today, it's up to 3 judges to decide who's right. Heather?
All right. It's scheduled to start, midnight on Thursday. Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Well, the U.S. Department of Justice putting a massive hack attack against Yahoo back in the headlines as prosecutors announce charges. Who they say was behind a security breach affecting 500 million email accounts. Plus, a high-ranking naval officer now part of a staggering bribery scandal involving 25 officers overall. What investigators say he did.
That letter, I think we'll pass that letter out to all of you so that you will have it. Lastly, the third issue that I have to bring to you today is we are a little uncomfortable with the ODNI. And whether or not they're going to let us have the proper computer technology that we need to go through the evidence that exists out at the CIA, out at Langley. And we are trying to work through that, but I can tell you that it has become a bit of a stumbling block for our investigators to actually be able to compile and go through the information. So those are the three issues that I have for you today, and I'd like to ask Mr. Schiff if he'd like to say a couple comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to join in saying that to date I've seen no evidence that supports the claim that President Trump made that his predecessor had wiretapped he and his associates at Trump Tower. Thus far, we have seen no basis for that whatsoever. We still want the Justice Department to respond to our letter. We've given them until March 20th. We're both willing to use compulsory process if that's necessary, though neither of us, I think, believe that will be necessary. Certainly, at the open hearing that we have on March 20th, we will be asking the Director if he has seen any evidence that substantiates the President's claim. It deeply concerns me that the President would make such an accusation without basis. We think it's in the public interest that this be addressed very openly by the Director, and we certainly expect that he will. It's my understanding that the three witnesses who had conflicts or other issues with the March 20th hearing are all available and I believe committed to the March 28th hearing. So the following week we'll get the remaining testimony from those witnesses, and we'll have as much time as necessary at the hearing for our members to ask their questions. Obviously, there's a substantial amount they may not be able to answer in open session, but we want to conduct as much of this investigation as we can in the open so the public is informed of the progress that we're making. Our members are going to the agency to review the documents. Our full committee now has access to the Gang of Eight materials that underlie the assessment that the intelligence community put out. I spent a few hours there yesterday and would encourage all the members to spend time out at the agency reviewing those documents. Finally, we I think are continuing to make progress, and the Chairman and I are doing everything that we can to keep this investigation bipartisan or nonpartisan, to make sure that we follow the evidence wherever it leads, and that is certainly our hope, and will continue to be our effort to do so. And with that, we're happy to respond to any questions.
Question about incidental collection. What's the information about the Trump associates gathered through incidental collection, and are you satisfied that this information was used lawfully?
So as it relates, we know for a fact, because it's out there in public, that incidental collection on General Flynn was picked up. What I remain concerned about is whether or not there is additional incidental collection that we are not aware of, and then if any of that information was put into any types of intelligence reports, and then whether or not additional names were unmasked. So if additional names were unmasked, we're going to have to understand where the proper procedures followed, and then did additional names get leaked to the media, or were people using that information for other purposes that wouldn't have had intelligence value. And that's what I remain concerned about, and that's why the letter that you see today, we're asking for all of those names by Friday.
Mr. Chairman, is that also your view on the matter?
Well, I think it's certainly an appropriate part of our oversight to make sure that the agencies are following the correct procedures when it comes to unmasking any names of Americans that may be gathered through incidental collection. But I do want to underscore that this is a separate matter from whether the President's allegations have any truth. And though we're talking about both these issues, the two are not related in the sense that there's no evidence that there was a wiretap of Trump and his associates at Trump Tower.
Mr. Nunes, you said pretty clearly that you do not think that Trump Tower was tapped. What gives you that confidence to say that?
Well, I actually said that last week. I think the challenge here is that President Obama wouldn't physically go over and wiretap Trump Tower. So now you have to decide, as I mentioned to you last week, are you going to take the tweets literally? And if you are, then clearly the president was wrong. But if you're not going to take the tweets literally, and if there's a concern that the president has about other people, other surveillance activities, looking at him or his associates, either appropriately or inappropriately. We want to find that out. I think it's all in the interpretation of what you believe.
And is there anything you've seen in the evidence so far that suggests that there were any conversations between people affiliated with the Trump campaign, people, Russian officials who are not the ambassador to Russia, anyone other tied to the Kremlin had conversations with the Trump campaign? Do you have any evidence?
Not that I'm aware of.
You know, I wouldn't answer that question as categorically as my colleague, and you know, we're not privileged to talk about the contents of the investigation, but I think we need to be very precise when we talk about this, and I just don't think we can answer categorically and not in this forum.
Mr. Chairman, the White House has said that they are extremely confident that the president will ultimately be vindicated in this claim. You're obviously pressing DOJ to release any evidence that they may have, but what about the White House? Are you also pressing them and encouraging them to reveal what the president knew, his grounds for making this claim?
Yeah, we're going to continue to follow the facts where they are. We're not going to make any assumptions. But as I've said before, I mean, for a long time here, I have been very clear about my concern about, number one, the incidental collection on General Flynn, how that was put into a product, how it was unmasked, how it was leaked to the public. Several crimes have been committed here, and I want to make sure that I don't want to get into. So Mr. Schiff, I don't know if you want to respond to that question also. So.
You know, I would just say that. I do think it's incumbent, if we get to March 20th and we have the testimony, I think we all expect from the director that there was no substance to the accusation that Barack Obama illegally wiretapped Trump Tower, that the president explained himself. I think this, you can't level an accusation of that type without either retracting it or explaining just why it was done. And I think that there are, from a national security perspective, great concerns if the president is willing to state things like that without any basis, because the country needs to be able to rely on him, particularly if we have a crisis that is an external crisis, as every president does within their term of office. So I think it is a serious matter, and I appreciate the chairman's willingness to have an open hearing on this, and I think the testimony will be very important.
Mr. Chairman,
let's get a new. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do you have any reason to believe that the president himself or anyone working for him in the White House would be one of these names that may have been swept up in something that could then have ultimately been leaked, like what happened with Michael Flynn?
Well, I think it's very possible, but like I said, we should know that by Friday.
Do you think the president himself might be one of those people that was swept up in this?
It's possible. You know, look. I mean, we know. We think we understand how General Flynn was picked up in incidental collection, and perhaps there's additional incidental collection or the other intelligence products where there was unmasking that occurred. Look, this is all the. This is why we're sending a letter. Let's get it all out in the open so that we understand. We don't, like I've said many times, I'm concerned about unmasking of Americans' names, but I think as they relate to, as you'll see in the letter, as they relate to either the Trump campaign and his folks or Hillary Clinton's campaign and her folks, we'd like to know if any names were unmasked, and I think that would help answer these questions.
If I could, let me just, if I can, also respond on that in a couple ways. First, Mr. Spicer has represented that he is not aware of any investigation that was targeting the president, and presumably no court-ordered surveillance of the president. He has also said that he is confident that the president was speaking accurately when he said he was wiretapped by his predecessor. Those two things cannot both be true unless he is suggesting that the FBI was engaged in a rogue operation unsupervised by a court to wiretap Trump Tower. There is absolutely no evidence of that, and no suggestion of any evidence of that. And I think to even put that forth, it was irresponsible of the president and his spokesman. And I also, in terms of our oversight responsibility, want to make one other point, and that is, while I think it's perfectly appropriate that we oversee the FISA process and the unmasking of any names, if any of that is implicated in any way, I have seen no evidence of any illegality in terms of any electronic surveillance pertaining to your question. So I don't want anything to be surmised that we're suggesting otherwise.
Chairman, if you don't get those names by Friday, will you subpoena that information as well?
Well, most likely, yes. If they don't have a good reason for not giving us that. I mean, FISA is a critical tool that our intelligence agencies use. We want to make sure that that it's done lawfully and legally. And part of that is going to be, even if it has to be at the Gang of 8 level, so just Mr. Shipp and myself, that would be fine. But we do need to have a good understanding of how that process worked.
Mr. Chairman, can you say are you driving at here that you think that Trump and the Trump associates were reverse targeted without a proper warrant, but they were tasked to basically look at anything that was incidentally collected, and then that was disseminated? Is that what you're looking for?
I don't want to... Look, let's wait till Friday for them to come out with the information, and then we'll have the open hearing on Monday before we start to speculate. But clearly, I just want to make sure that the FISA processes were properly followed, and that the unmasking of names did not occur improperly.
I just want to add that I certainly have seen no evidence of that.
And so over here we had a question.
Can you elaborate a little on the concern you mentioned earlier about ODNI not giving you the technological setup to review some of the intelligence underlying the conclusions? Yeah,
the Office of Director of National Intelligence, which is overseeing how we have access to these documents, one of the simple things that I think everyone should understand this is that we should be able to get a basic type of computer system out there to be able to catalog all of the data that went into the intelligence report that was produced and the beginning of January, whatever that date was, January 6th or 7th. I just think that's a no-brainer, and why they would even stop us on this is beyond...
And is there any reason? I mean, are they stalling, or are they saying you can't have access to this?
Well, the bottom line is that we don't have a computer out there to actually be able to catalog the information.
And if I could just add to one of the reasons why this is significant, and obviously there was a big issue with the agency over the Senate's use of a computer and whether that computer was viewed by the agency while it was in the process of a review of the enhanced interrogation techniques. We feel a real sense of urgency about conducting this investigation not only thoroughly, but as swiftly as possible, given the magnitude of the investigation. So anything that slows us down is a problem. And I'm confident this will be ultimately resolved, but the longer it takes to resolve it, the longer it takes us to do our work. And we had to work through the issue of gaining access to the full committee of the Gang of 8 materials. Now we have to work through the issue of getting access to computers to do our work. We're also working our way through the budget process here to get increased staff to help us with the investigation. It's going to take time to get those staff cleared. So these are all some of the challenges we're dealing with in trying to do this expeditiously.
Without the computer, how are you going through the information that you're...
Well, right now, I was there yesterday taking a lot of handwritten notes, which is not ideal, and obviously we have to leave our notes behind. But at the end of the day, what we hope to do, obviously, is when the investigation is finished, is compile a report, and having the information that we go through indexed with our comments will be very important in terms of putting that report together. So this will be resolved. Hopefully, what the Chairman and I are saying today will help nudge the agency along in making it happen.
Has the FBI actually confirmed that there's an investigation ongoing into Russia and the Trump campaign?
Well, look, we're not going to get into what the FBI tells us or doesn't tell us, as the ranking member said earlier. But as you can imagine, this committee's has a long track record of trying to shine the light on the Russian government and their activities. We, as the House Intelligence Committee, have long had an investigation into Russian activities, especially cyber activities. That continues. And clearly, I think the concerns we've raised over just cyber attacks alone, we would hope that many throughout the IC are conducting investigations into the Russians and their ongoing bad activity around the globe.
So, do you have any evidence that there were contacts between the Trump campaign and Russians? That's the question we've been asking you every time.
Yeah, I don't have any evidence of that, and we're not going to get into. I mean, this gets to the whole issue of incidental collection. Who else was talking to the Russian ambassador? This is a slippery slope. So I think you just need to let the appropriate agencies get us the information in a timely manner, which I agree with the ranking member on. The more that they stall, the more they make it more complicated for us, the slower the investigation goes, and the more time it takes to answer your questions.
And I do want to say on that question, because Director Clapper was asked a similar question. I cannot answer that question in the same way, certainly with the same categorical nature of the response. I don't share that summary conclusion, and that's about all I can say on that subject.
Have you been able to get access to those ODNY? Go ahead. Have you been able to get access to those computers in past investigations? I mean, is this something you would typically get spelled out on, or is this kind of unprecedented?
Well, this is a little unprecedented in terms of, the whole committee now has access to, all the members on the Intelligence Committee have access to what are called the Gang of Eight source documents. We now have investigators out there. Many members from my side and the ranking member's side have been out there. And the challenge we're having now is that we need to be able to catalog all of this in a simple way. If not, it's going to take us longer to get through it if we have to do it all by hand.
Chairman, quick question. You said that several crimes have been committed here, but it's not illegal to unmask a name if it deals with an investigation having to do with national security, right? So I wanted you to expound on that. And secondly, Congressman Schiff, you said that the FBI hadn't been cooperating, and then you said that they had started cooperating. What has occurred in between those two statements?
So as it relates to crimes that have been committed, I am quite confident that it is illegal to leak FISA collected names of Americans. That's illegal. It's also illegal to leak any additional classified information. So that has happened. It remains the crimes that we know that have been committed, which I'm sure we'll get into more of that on Monday. Mr. Schiff, there's a second question on, I think.
With respect to the second question, the concern that I raised a couple weeks ago was that during our hearing with Director Comey, a number of the questions members had, the director declined to answer. It wasn't that I was unsatisfied with the content of the answer, it was that he simply declined. And I expressed it at the time, my hope that the director would go back to the Department of Justice and be prepared to come back to us and respond more fully to the questions we were asking. The FBI has now been more forthcoming on a number of the issues I was concerned about. There are still a number of other issues that remain to be ironed out, but we are certainly getting more cooperation than we were initially.
Did any of the incidental collection come through a foreign intelligence service?
I don't think we can comment on any questions related to what kind of intelligence gathering or electronic surveillance. Apart from, I think, the category that the president tweeted about, I don't think we're at liberty to talk about either the contents of the investigation or the conduct of any of our foreign intelligence gatherings.
Just on that point, if I can, at the White House briefing earlier this week, Sean Spicer seemed to blur the lines on the definition of wiretapping, saying that this was sort of code, if you will, for broader surveillance, which would cover incidental collection.
Well, I can express my view, and the chair and I may have a different perspective on this, but my interpretation, frankly, of what the White House has been communicating since the president's tweets were, first, we don't want to talk about this, we're giving it to the Intelligence Committee. Then, we're not sure if there's any there. Then, well, maybe he meant something different to, well, maybe it was the TV or the microwave, no, we fully believe the president will be vindicated in his claims of wiretapping. So they've been all over the map. the reality is I don't think they have the foggiest idea what was behind the president's claim, except maybe something you watched on TV. And I think the rest is designed to downplay, minimize, or obfuscate the fact that the president said something that was patently untrue. But that is my interpretation.
And Chairman Nunes, can you speak to this?
Yeah, I think first. Yeah,
incidental collection first from a foreign agency amendment.
Yeah, I think Mr. Schiff answered that properly. I don't want to get into where intelligence is coming from or not coming from. But I think I want to stop here just a second and say that it's okay for Mr. Schiff and I to have disagreements. He represents a district just like I do. We're clearly from different political parties. And at the end of the day, it's all on our interpretation of what people say or don't say, and it's the court of public opinion ultimately that has the say in all this. But we're going to work together, and we're probably going to have a lot that we're going to agree on. We may have some things we disagree on. We'll try to get through those. But as it relates to the president's claims, just like I said last week, I think you just have to be careful about how literally you take these comments. But I do remain concerned, as I opened with, that there could be incidental collection and there could be unmasking of American names that I really do want to get to the bottom of. And if we move forward from this, I mean, I actually agree with Mr. Schiff on the point that, look, if the White House or the president want to come out and clarify his statements more, it would probably be helpful. But look, at the end of the day, just like I said last week, President Obama doesn't do wiretapping, just like President Trump can't do wiretapping. So the whole premise of the statement was wrong. So then you have to figure out, okay, did he actually mean it literally, or did he not? And I think that's the question that we have here.
Can I just be clear on one point here, because it was the first question I asked. So you are not satisfied that the unmasking or the incidental collection was done in a lawful manner?
Well, I guess I would refer you back to, matter of fact, I was just going through this earlier. As you probably, some of you may remember, over the course of the last year, we had a concern about members of Congress who were caught up in incidental collection. This story came out publicly in the Wall Street Journal regarding, I think it was involving the Israelis. And then we went through a whole year-long process working with the IC to ensure that when congressional identities are picked up in incidental collection, that we, the Gang of Eight, are notified of that happening. And so I would kind of refer you back to that. That was a process that had to be cleaned up, because clearly there was, clearly people knew who the members of Congress were likely that were in these, but they weren't being unmasked. We weren't being notified. That's a problem. Now, so the question I would have is, has that happened again? And we don't know that, but we want to find out.
Mr. Nunes, are you concerned about the contacts that apparently occurred between Roger Stone and Guccifer 2.0, of course, who's known as a Russian hacker? Is that something you're looking into?
Look, I know this sounds, I only know Roger Stone from what I've seen on TV. I don't know that he had any formal role in the campaign that I'm aware of.
So the committee's not going to be looking into it?
Well, we'll follow facts wherever they lead us. But I don't, at this point, that's down the road.
What about Paul Mann?
If I could address that, and a couple of points I wanted to make just to follow up on one of the earlier questions. The chairman is exactly right. He and I think, may give a different interpretation to why the president said what he said. But there's no daylight between us on the fact that neither one of us have seen any evidence to support what the president tweeted. And I think that's probably the most important point. With respect to Roger Stone, we have a U.S. person affiliated with the campaign who has now said publicly that he had communications, I think first he said with Julian Assange, and then he said after that with an intermediary to Mr. Assange or WikiLeaks, and has now acknowledged having communication with Guccifer 2, which the intelligence community views as essentially a Russian cutout. And obviously these two platforms were used to publish documents damaging to Secretary Clinton and helpful to Donald Trump. So I'll tell you, that concerns me a great deal, because you have someone affiliated with a campaign having direct communication with two of the outlets Apparently, during the campaign, and in one case, as I recall, Mr. Stone predicted that John Podesta's time in the barrel would come. So while Mr. Stone has said that he could not have predicted the DNC hack before it happened, he apparently did predict that John Podesta would be in the barrel. So I think it does beg a lot of questions that I would certainly like answered.
Do you want to interview him, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn? Does the committee want to talk to these?
Well, you know, I don't want to go through a witness list, but I do want to respond that those facts that he has already admitted are of great interest and concern to me.
And look, as I've said before, if these people want to come forward to our committee, they're welcome to, and they're welcome to provide either depositions, written testimony, and that remains the case. So anybody who wants to come forward with information, but as I've said, we're not going to just call in witnesses based on just press reports alone.
Is Michael Flynn cooperating with your investigation?
We have not spoke to Mr. Flynn at this point.
And are you confident that you can complete a full and complete investigation without seeing Mr. Trump's tax returns?
Yes, I am.
Well, I think we ought to look into obviously the full range of active measures the Russians employed. If one of the Russian active measures was the same as what they have done in Europe, and that is financially entangle people as a way of exerting influence over them, then it may be within the scope of our investigation, but I don't think we want to begin with that conclusion.
Does the that there's a problem with taking Trump's tweets literally and how the actual literal implication of this tweet was most certainly wrong? Have you had any communications with anyone in the White House about the problem of this, the problem with when the president tweets something that you know, an ally of the president, say is flat out wrong?
Well, look, we've talked about this here at these press conferences before. I think the president tweeting is a good thing, and there's a fine line between having too many people monitoring what he's saying and no one monitoring what he's saying. But look, he's the President of the United States, and I think him tweeting, I think the American people, for the most part, enjoy it, including all of you in the press. I think people enjoy these tweets, and just hopefully, you know, it would be helpful if they could be a little more focused. But at the end of the day, he's elected, and I'm not.
What do you need for the letter now? Has the intel community been stonewalling you on any of this? And do you expect the recipients to actually respond by Friday?
Yeah, I would expect, with the seriousness of with everything as it relates to FISA and the problems that we already had a year ago, dealing with the notification of Congress on people in Congress that were identified, I would hope that they would rapidly get these responses to us, because look, either it's going to be more evidence that we'll have to continue this investigation on this matter of dealing with FISA, or we'll be able to put that to bed. The faster we can put any FISA problems to bed, the better for the IC and the American people.
And I would join the chairman in what he said earlier, that I'd expect the FBI and the department to fully cooperate. If they don't, I'd be prepared to support the use of compulsory process.
Any more questions?
Chairman, have you seen any evidence that Yahoo was involved?
Hold on a second. Let's go over here and then we'll come back.
In your mind, what do you see as the most important question that the committee is trying to answer with this investigation? The same question as Congressman Schiff.
Yeah, I don't see that there's one important question. I think they're all important. Overall, this is great for the work that we've done over many years here on this committee, because finally the American people are awakening to the fact that Putin is creating problems for us and our allies all over the globe. So this is something that I've desperately wanted people to pay attention to. Perhaps if the last administration paid closer attention to what we were saying at the time, the opportunities and the options that Congress gave to the last administration to help the Ukrainians and other countries, if they would have used those and not waited till the end, until after the election to do something, I think would have been very helpful, and we wouldn't have had this outcome.
You know, I think there are
So that's some of the information about one of the big investigations underway in Washington right now. Democrat Adam Schiff and Republican Devin Nunes, the chair, Nunes is, of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. They are looking into allegations that the Russian government at the highest levels meddled in our election back in November. Also looking into President Trump's claims that he was wiretapped by President Obama or the Obama administration. You heard some of the question and answer there. We'll be getting into that more on Happening Now. In the meantime, a high-ranking naval officer, now part of a staggering bribery scandal involving 25 officers. What investigators say he did that earned arrest. Heard the chair and ranking member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence talking about their investigation into Russian meddling in our election, and also in their investigation into this tweet from President Trump. Came out a week and a half ago. He really roiled Washington on a Saturday morning when he wrote this: "How low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon Watergate. Bad or sick guy." The investigation into that is ongoing as well. Let's talk about it with Simon Rosenberg, the president and founder of NDN, a former campaign advisor to President Clinton as well. Lisa Booth is also with us, founder of High Noon Strategies, contributor for the Washington Examiner, and a Fox News contributor. Simon, we heard, I believe it was Congressman Schiff, the ranking member, say they are trying to keep this investigation bipartisan, not meander down political pathways. How do you think they're doing on that?
Well, I think it's been an open question, but today I think should be very reassuring. I mean, you saw the two of them standing side by side. They didn't agree on everything, and they acknowledged that. There wasn't acrimony. And I think that what I learned today is that there is going to be a very serious investigation into what the Russians did in our elections last year. And it's important for us as a country to get that. Not only do we need to prevent it from ever happening again, but we also have to make sure we're working with our European allies to prevent Russia from continuing these kind of activities in Europe in elections right now. So I was very heartened to hear today with that press conference.
Lisa, Chairman Nunes was talking specifically about, you know, the sort of irony that led to the resignation of a guy who used to be one of the most respected Army intelligence analysts out there, General Mike Flynn, who was director, President Trump's first director of the first national security advisor. He got tripped up in this investigation. And Chairman Nunes said crimes were committed here in terms of how he was surveilled and, more specifically, how his name was released. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's problematic, but it seems like the media doesn't seem that interested in the legality of those leaks. And so I think it's important for Chairman Nunes to mention that, the fact that these investigations are ongoing. They said that FBI Director Comey will testify, I believe it was on March 20th, March 28th. So it's important for them to continue to get to the bottom of this. But more importantly, look, there's been a lot of recklessness to go around. One, you know, President Trump has a responsibility to ensure that the information he's putting out there is substantiated, to be careful in the language that he is using, the information that he's putting out there.
You're doubting what he tweeted?
Well, you know, so far, you know, I hope that the White House produces that information, but so far there's been nothing to substantiate that. So, of course, that's a concern. I also think it's equally concerning that the media and the left have run rampant with these allegations and the notion that somehow Russia stole the election for Hillary Clinton and putting it in the hands of Donald Trump, and also that there was somehow collusion between Trump officials and Russia when both of those allegations remain unsubstantiated. Also putting out information like that dossier that nobody's been able to verify, and someone like Bob Woodward, an investigative reporter for the Washington Post, has said is a garbage document. So I think there's a lot of recklessness, and if I'm the American people sitting at home watching all this, what's true, what's not? And I think it's really sad that we've reached this point as a country when there's so much misinformation being put out there to the American people.
We may get word from James Comey about whether the FBI is investigating Simon, the Russian activities. Will that put the matter to rest?
We're going to find out a lot in the next few weeks. I mean, these investigations in the House and the Senate are proceeding. We're going to see open testimony next week with some of the major actors in this whole thing. I think we're going to learn a lot. But I just want to comment on something that Lisa said, is that the intelligence, it's not unsubstantiated that the Russians intervened in our elections on behalf of Donald Trump. That was what was
That's not what I said.
No, but that's a conclusion of our intelligence community.
That's not what I said, though.
As a fact, right?
But that's not what I said.
And the second thing that you said is that there wasn't contact between Trump officials,
That's also
campaign
not what
officials.
I said.
Okay, fine. We know for a fact there have been 5 Trump officials, campaign officials, that interacted with Russian government officials. That's a fact, right? These are things that we know today, and I think it's why there is such an urgency to getting this investigation underway. And again, I was heartened by what I heard from the 2 congressmen earlier today.
Because
John, if I can,
I'm sorry, Lisa, because that news conference went on quite a while, we're going to have to leave it there.
He distorted
we'll
what
get you
I
back
said.
on another time.
I don't think I did.
Talk about
you
it.
absolutely did.
All right, Simon Rosenberg, Lisa Booth.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And we'll be right back.